health care, Gordon Smith has refused to support any of the proposals to grant universal coverage and control costs, and he even opposed the simple idea of allowing Medicare to negotiate reasonable prices with the drug companies. And on the national debt, Gordon Smith has done as much as any member of Congress to help George Bush add $3 trillion to the debt. That's a $10,000 charge to the credit card of every man, woman, and child in America, which we will have to pay back. He's done that by supporting virtually every kind of spending, including, of course, this insanely expensive war, and by supporting all of George Bush's tax cuts for the wealthy, plus adding some of his own. When it comes to the federal budget, Gordon Smith's philosophy is simple. If it increases the debt, he's for it. He's the senator from Pisa. We're honoring Paul Revere today, and one of the slogans of the American Revolution was, "No taxation without representation." And that's a good slogan to use against Gordon Smith, because children don't get to vote. But today's children will be paying taxes to pay off the debt that Gordon Smith and George Bush have piled up with this war and their tax cuts for the wealthy friends. Why does Gordon Smith do all these things? Is it that he's an evil man? He's not. He's a nice man. Gordon Smith reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. Remember how at the end of the movie when the wizard's exposed as a fraud, and Dorothy says, "You're a very bad man." And the wizard says, "No, dear, I'm a good man. I'm just a very bad wizard." Gordon Smith is a very nice man. He just happens to be a very bad senator. Gordon Smith voted for the war. Ron Wyden didn't. World Blumenauer didn't. Peter DeFazio didn't. Darlene Woolley didn't. David Wu didn't. Somehow, they all knew better. Gordon Smith did. And for 4 years, he enthusiastically supported it. As late as June of last year, he gave a speech on the Senate floor saying this war was a noble struggle for freedom from which we could not withdraw. He only started to criticize the war last December, curiously, a month after an election. And after he did so, he was asked 2 questions. One was, do you feel any remorse or regret over your support of the war? And his response was, that's all history. He was also asked, what happened to change his mind? And he said that in July of last year, he wrote a book called Fiasco about the war, which he got deeply in trouble. Now, 2 points about that. One, can any of you imagine Mark Hatfield saying that more than 3 years into a war and finally figured out he was messed up because he read a book? Second, if you actually read the book, you will see that in the chapter that begins on page 85, called The Silence of the Lambs, the author says that George Bush didn't get us into this war by himself. There were many failures in the American system that led to the war, and perhaps the greatest failure was the failure of Congress. Congress failed to ask the right questions. They accepted ridiculous answers to the questions they did ask. Failed to expose not only the weakness of the case on weapons of mass destruction, but the fact that the Bush administration had no plan whatsoever for what to do with the radicals they had. That's all history. Gordon Smith's history is he's responsible for this war. He's responsible. He can't blame it all on Don Rumsfeld. And in this election, we're going to hold him accountable. So much for Gordon Smith. That's why he needs to be removed. Why do I think that I can beat him? I'll tell you why. In the immortal words of the great Lou Gehrig, I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Let me first of all in my family. My mother dropped out of college when she had a baby. That was me. She went on to become one of the first Head Start teachers. Then she worked for years as a waitress in Cottage Grove. But she made darn sure all her kids went to college. And when she got a chance, she went back to school, got her PhD, and became a researcher in early childhood education. My mother would do anything for children, her own or someone else's. My dad, think about it.
Yeah!
Then he became active in the anti-war movement, and after we moved to Oregon, he became a union organizer. At 70, he's still a union organizer.
Yeah.
And so is my little brother Misha, who 2 years ago spent hundreds of hours on the picket line in the snow, maybe not snow, cold, rain, with people who do the hardest kind of job, working with emotionally disturbed kids. We're fighting for a raise from something like $8.65 an hour to $9.05 an hour. Last month, my dad turned 70, my brother Misha turned 30. Between the two of them, they represent 100 years of commitment to social justice.
Yeah.
My brother Misha and our brother Max, by the way, is the author of the funniest Monica Lewinsky joke ever, but I don't think I'll say that much. Are the two smartest and funniest people on earth, far smarter and funnier than I could ever hope to be. My family taught me the values of truth and tolerance, and courage and compassion and commitment, and love and laughter and loyalty. And every day I strive to live up to their example. You all know there's some days when you know you're just not going to cut it, and you forgive yourself and promise you'll try harder tomorrow. I've also been incredibly lucky in my career, starting with when I was in 9th grade and the Cottage Grove school shut down for lack of money, and I started going to the U of O. Why was that lucky? Well, it meant that I graduated in 1981, which meant I was part of the last college class to get full financial aid from the federal government. After that, Raise came in and started cutting financial aid. I graduated from the U of O with no debt. Not many kids can say that today. A few years later, I was again incredibly lucky when I was in Washington, D.C. looking for a job, and I saw an ad in the paper that said, Department of Justice, sue polluters. And I said, that's a job. And, you know, it was a job. It was a job where we sued polluters to get them to stop violating the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, where we got them to repay the taxpayers for millions of dollars that was spent cleaning up hazardous waste sites. It was a job where you got to stand up in court and say, Steve Novick, Your Honor, representing the United States. It was a job where my colleagues and I, as young lawyers, went up against big, powerful law firms, representing big, powerful corporations, armed with huge piles of money. And routinely, we and the environment and the people of the United States were with and they. We thought of ourselves as Knights of the Round Table, and I think that's what we were. And then I came back to Oregon, where I had a chance to fight for truth, justice, and the Oregon way on a dozen different battlefields. In 2000, it was Bill Sizemore with his Measure 91 that would have gutted schools and healthcare and public safety. In 2006, it was Don McIntyre and Howard Rich with their Measure 48, which again would have gutted schools and healthcare and public safety. In both of those campaigns, I had the same job, which was to do the research, figure out exactly what these measures would do, and then pass that on to others who would carry that information to the voters. Both times the voters were with us. They soundly rejected Bill Sizemore in 2000. Somewhere along the way, I found out that there was waste in the Oregon lottery. Millions of dollars being thrown at video poker retailers, money that was supposed to go to schools. And I railed against that on my own for a few years, with limited success. But then, I was joined by ARDES, Oregon PTA, Stand for Children, the Oregon School Employees Association, the Oregon Education Association. And thanks to all their efforts, in December, the Oregon Court of Appeals issued a ruling that what the lottery had been doing all those years was illegal. And from now on, they can only give reasonable profits to the retailers and can't just throw money at them at the expense of kids. And in all of those and several other struggles, it has been my honor, my privilege, and my great good fortune to work with and fight beside the people in this room. the wonderful, incredible people in this room. You are the stewards of the state of Oregon. When danger threatens, you rush to our defense, as if you had been summoned by a gigantic bat signal. You, too, are knights of the round table. So the question is not,